Kerry, how are you
What's up,
doing?
Sean? I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
Gosh, you're looking good too. Book collection, man.
Yeah.
Twice?
Pardon me?
You read all those books twice?
I haven't read all of all of them once, but I read parts and pieces of all of them, and
I thought maybe.
I got that affliction. That there's a word for it in Japanese where I buy more books than I can consume. But
What's the word?
I'll look it up somewhere. I found it somewhere. So it's a phenomenon, like a psychological phenomenon,
That's great.
from which I suffer.
Well, mine is collecting stuff.
Yeah, but the interesting tie in there, Sean, is like, where does that curiosity come from, and where do we lose it, right?
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, maybe we can jump off right there. Like my thing is the entrepreneurial mindset, right?
Yep.
I've spent the last nearly 30 years like trying to deconstruct the mindset and the methods of the underdog entrepreneur, right? So at first I was thinking, well, how does the everyday entrepreneur do it? How does somebody that has no big ideas, they're not at Stanford, they don't have like any intellectual, they don't have any special personality, they're not particularly charismatic or whatever. Like, how do they do it? Right? And I started interviewing all these underdogs, Sean. And I tripped into something that is like just utterly fascinating, right? Like it's almost like it's like you got to think of it as a phenomenon. Like you got to suspend the idea for a minute that entrepreneurship is about business, and you got to look at the human as an organism that's trying to adapt and survive in its environment. Right. And as humans, we adapt in our environment by making ourselves useful to other humans. Right. Like, so Sean, like what I thought we would do maybe is like kind of like, I love this idea from Elon Musk of like the first principles. Like, let's break it down to its most basic concepts to put a dent in the universe. Like we got to figure out like the intersection between our own natural interests, our natural abilities. Like when you put those two things together, so if you think of a Venn diagram, the first sphere is your natural interests. And the interesting thing is you don't really get to pick those things. They're in you on your hard drive. I mean, you're interested in like football because whatever. But like you have natural interests that are unique to you. And you have natural abilities, things that you're capable of being good at. Right? And if you kind of loop those two spheres together, I think what you have is authenticity. Right? Like that's how we can think of authenticity. And then like that makes you, like as Naval Ravikant said, like you escape competition through authenticity.
That's rich.
No one can be you. No one can be Sean Griffin better than Sean Griffin. Right? And the work you're doing is like proof, is evidence of that, right? The dent you're making in the universe is like phenomenal.
Thank you, Gary.
And so, like, first of all, like kind of put those two things together. And then the third sphere is like the needs of your fellow humans. So, like, when I talk about entrepreneurship, I'm trying to avoid business terms that dehumanize it, like markets and segments and channels and all that. It's like, no, you're a human. You have interests and abilities. You're on this journey to try to figure out how to intersect those things. Right? How to make yourself useful to other humans. Like that's it. And the more useful you become, the better off you're going to be. Right? So you can think of an XY axis, right? Where the vertical is your usefulness and the horizontal is the number of people that you're going to be useful to.
Yeah.
It's like a brain surgeon is like high and to the left.
Mm-hmm.
They're really, really useful to like 5 people.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you got like, Beyonce. She's 99 cents useful to a whole lot of people. So she's like low and to the right.
Yeah.
But the premise is, and this is what I want to get to ultimately, is that we learn not to think this way. We're conditioned to make ourselves useful within the context of an established organization where the useful thing has already been determined by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So you're expected to fulfill a predetermined, well-defined role, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the box, right?
What box?
And so, the thing I'm trying to get to here is like, so you start paying attention to rules. Like, school is designed to bring you into the world as it is, right? And it never contemplates, like, maybe you could need some skills to think about what the world could be. Like, those are absent. Our systems of education are still predicated on these 19th century, centralized control. Somebody else is going to figure it all out. They're going to tell you what to do, and they're going to give you your little paycheck for doing it.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are in the world, I'm trying to be culturally sensitive here. Like, that kind of worked for a minute.
We are, Gary.
I realize that, but from a U.S. perspective,
Yeah.
in the 1950s, like, everybody got a car and a house and a boat,
Mm-hmm.
right? You didn't have to, like, there's an abundance of relatively low-skilled, high-paying, lifetime jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't really need to learn how to think critically and creatively and how to be, innovative, how to be resourceful and resilient. And you didn't need those skills. So they're absent.
Yeah.
Right? And it never occurs to people. I mean, this is the nature of a mindset, which is kind of what I'm interested in, the entrepreneurial mindset, is your mindset is sort of made up of these deeply held beliefs and assumptions
Mm-hmm.
that are so deeply embedded in our individual and collective psyches that we don't even know they're there.
Mm-hmm. It's this unconscious bias as well.
There's unconscious. It's not necessarily a bias, but you can think of it as like there's like mental models, beliefs, assumptions that are guiding all of our decisions. And these beliefs and assumptions and mental models worked at one point in time. They were effective. Otherwise, we would not have adopted them. But the world has changed. But in the meantime, what's happened is those mental models they're now on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So another way to think about this, Sean, is, how do you remove, like, the doctor says, Sean, you have a tumor. It's in your body somewhere. We got to get rid of it, but we don't know if it's in your little toe, in your left ear, in your stomach, in your head. They don't know where it is. They can't see it on an fMRI. So that's how to think about our beliefs. Like, we're operating on beliefs that we don't even realize that we're operating on, right? I mean, that
are looking more and more outdated.
Correct. And ultimately, what I want to get.
Gary, so from all these interviews?
Yep.
And you've traveled. This is all over the country, U.S.
Yep.
And you've done some work in South America as well. You've right?
We've interviewed entrepreneurs in South Africa, Europe, North America, Latin America. Right. Yeah.
So everywhere. And what is the one takeaway you can provide the audience here in terms of a thing they could do to shift their mental model, to start thinking different in a more effective way? Because it's a practice, it's a learned skill. It's learned. You can learn it.
It's a great question, Sean. It's the question. You're asking the right question.
Mm-hmm.
So after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs,
I want to know.
I found this universal assumption that's deeply embedded in the mind of the entrepreneur. And it's so deeply embedded, they rarely have the ability to articulate it clearly. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's like the rules of grammar in your native language. You learn them by the age of 4 or 5 with no instruction from anyone. But you can't articulate those rules to another human being to save your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the knowledge and the assumptions. That's sort of a good representation of our mindset, right? Okay. Yeah. So I think
I want to change that model. I want to change my thinking. I want to change the way. I want to reprogram my brain. I want to reboot it. I want to,
right.
Reboot.
Right. So
I got like a computer. I got to upload and get some new software.
And this is, it drives me nuts when people are always talking about think outside of the box. That's like, a lot of cases, that's kind of like a useless metaphor. It's like, what the hell is the box? It's like David Foster Wallace's commencement speech, like the fish, right? The 2 fish swimming along, and they pass an old fish. And the old fish nods at the 2 young fish and says, "Good morning, fellas. How's the water?" And the 2 young fish keep swimming along until one looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Right? Mm-hmm. But let me get back to your question.
Yeah, please.
So this core assumption is that it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to other humans. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the genesis of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's like where we shift the locus of control. But again, we don't say, "Hey, my name's Gary. I have an external locus of control." Right?
That's right.
But what happens is, like, once you start to think, like, how can I make myself more useful to more people? You realize, like, you don't need a fancy degree to do that. You don't need money to do that. You don't need to be a charismatic type to do that. You don't need to be an inventor or a genius.
Anybody.
The employee mindset teaches us, thanks to the division of labor, to focus very narrowly, right? The entrepreneurial mindset, we broaden the focus, like we open the aperture of the lens to start thinking with empathy, like, what the hell is going on here? What's missing? How can I make this situation better? And make that like a mental habit. Like, the trash can doesn't make any sense in this corner of the room. Let's put it over in that corner of the room. Like, start doing that now, right?
Yeah.
You're not waiting for the big idea, but you have to start paying attention to what other people want and need, right? I mean, I think that's
awesome.
That's really it. And from there, like, you start developing the attitudes, the behavior, the skills.
That's great. It's practice, right? It's a muscle. You got to practice, and you got to strengthen it. And it's like I've been talking about over the last few days. It's we all have to get more uncomfortable. Entrepreneurs are comfortable being uncomfortable. Right? That's practice.
You got to tolerate ambiguity is really what you're talking about, right?
It's right.
And like, I'm telling my adult children this, like, the ability to tolerate ambiguity is a superpower. It's a superpower. And this is what I'm telling my kids.
What's your superpower? I love it. Yeah.
It's like, I say to my kids who are, in their late 20s, one is about to turn 30, like, either you learn how to tolerate ambiguity, or you will always be at the mercy of someone who has.
That's right.
Right?
It's beautiful.
As humans, we loathe to walk down a path of uncertainty. We loathe to walk down a path where no one else is on that path. We loathe to walk down a path where the outcome is not assured. Right?
Where does this come from, though, Gary? Because, I have an 18-month-old little boy, and he boom, because you know me, I'm like, all right, I got a chance to set up and help mold in the best I can with his own personality, not project my own stuff on him, but help make him more empathetic, more caring, more self-determined, more comfortable in uncertainty, kind of an ambiguity person. It's a start there at that. Is that the beginning, and that's where parents.
It totally does. It totally does, Sean. It totally does. I mean, you know, here's another way to think about this.
I'm a beginner, Gary. I am like such a beginner.
Oh, but it's like, here's the thing to remember, Sean. I'm working on a blog post right now about lecturing birds on how to fly.
Right. Good.
Because that's the business you and I are in. Like, let's just face it. That's the business every educator is in, right? And so let's start with this basic assumption that humans, like every other mammal, is born with the innate desire and capability to figure out everything they need to learn to adapt and thrive in their environment. It comes on the hard drive, right?
Mm-hmm. It's programmed in.
And it's programmed, but again, you know, and we see evidence of this, Sean, in our space, in the entrepreneurial community. I see like an overwhelming amount of evidence of people with average intelligence teaching themselves all kinds of amazing things without the guidance of another, without a formalized structure or a teacher or any of that formalized learning processes. You know this, Sean. You see it every day, right? The evidence of it is abundantly clear. Yet you will rarely hear of such cases in the halls of the academe.
Because that would work against them and their elite status.
They need us to believe that we need them.
That's right. I understand.
Right? And so that's why, you know, look, again, from a Western perspective, you know, entrepreneurship education has exploded on university campuses over the last 20 years. Guess what? Startups are in decline.
I know.
Right? So what's going on there? I mean, part of it. Like,
when we build and we are engaging in helping to design or develop any kind of accelerator, and the first thing they want to do, business accelerator, first thing they want to do is put it on a college campus. Our first reaction is that's the last place we want to go because that's an intimidating place. You won't get it won't.
It's antithetical.
It's not inclusive. And people just really get uncomfortable for the most part being there, unless you are an academic type of person. And so there's no question that. Were you listening? Were you able to hear Mansour, in the rural girls programming? And just forget the traditional and just leapfrog into what's the specific skill you can train them that these girls are already ripe to learn right now, and. It's common sense. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to figure this out. Just do it. And then what happens is you get academics to come into it. And this is where Mansour will be able to bypass all that. And if he's hearing and listening to this still, that is a key, I think, right now, is to just tailor the skills to what is needed and then meeting them where they're at, not where you think they should be at.
Well, let me riff on that for a second, because that's how I'm putting the dent in the universe. I've educated 2,500 educators on how to be effective with entrepreneurship.
I'm one.
Right? Yeah, right on, man. Likewise, I've learned from you just as much, Sean, and inspired by you as well. But the other thing that I discovered in this research, you know, so as I started interviewing entrepreneurs, Sean, I started looking for the common and replicable factors in their behavior. So if you said, well, my dad gave me a $500,000 loan from my trust fund, like, I'm not interested in that interview.
Right.
I'm not interested in Elon Musk because the dude's got $100 million exit from PayPal and an IQ that's off the charts. That's not common. It's not replicable.
And he also
reprograms
his brain on a regular basis. He has like these techniques to change
the
way he thinks.
He's just an outlier. I mean, he's such an outlier to the extent that it's not really useful to the average person.
That's right.
And so the conclusion I've come to is that like non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. right? That we're all driven by this innate desire
My mother would agree.
to master this ambient environment and to do things that benefit other humans. Like, here's an interesting fact, Sean. You cannot tap into the deepest level of motivation unless the work you are doing is benefiting other humans. And you can see that. That's not my moral, over-caffeinated opinion. That's in the psychological literature.
Yeah.
Right?
It's just like linear thinking, though, Gary. It's the same thing. And linear thinking is part of that because we naturally think in radiant style. Look behind me. That's how we think. And we're retrained how to think linear. And so that must be part of the process of eliminating the entrepreneurial spirit in us.
Yeah. But ultimately, Sean, what I'm trying to get to is that, most of the world is making what psychologists would call a fundamental attribution error. And that is a fancy word.
English, Gary. What does that mean?
English, por favor.
I don't understand.
It's the fundamental attribution error is the tendency to over-attribute a person's behavior to their traits, to their hereditary traits, while ignoring all the invisible situational factors that, it turns out, have a much more powerful influence, such that it renders our hereditary traits more or less irrelevant. Now, if you think about the value that entrepreneurs bring to a community, to society, to the organizations, the communities they inhabit, no one would argue they're the most important players in a modern economy, right?
Yep, I'd agree.
Yet we basically assume that it's trait-based, that every once in a while a Zuckerberg comes along, pops out of the chute, and the rest of us should just be prepared for cubicle hell. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So from here, Sean, the idea is this. The only distinguishing factor between an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur is the nature of the goal they are pursuing. In other words, it's the goal that elicits the behavior.
Yeah. I can totally see that.
You got it? You got what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm clear.
So if your goal is to get a diploma so you can get a good job, that means you are extrinsically motivated, which is a weaker form of motivation.
Right.
For us, Sean, the work we do is the reward. We're not doing this for some separable reward, for prestige, for dollars, for letter grades, for whatever, right?
Yep.
And so what's the goal you're pursuing? If you ask most people that, they're kind of like, look at you like a deer in the headlights.
Right.
A steady paycheck? Okay, fine. Like, that's just not that compelling. Right? It's like, how are you going to make a dent in the universe? Sean, when a human being is approached with an opportunity, and you know this and you've seen it in other people, right? Mm-hmm. You have the same physiological response you do when you're faced with a threat. Mm-hmm. Your body prepares you to approach, not to avoid. But you start shallow breathing, and you see it in your workshops. You see the toes start tapping, the legs start bouncing. You can see people look out the window. The minute that happens, you can see it.
Yeah.
They stop listening to you, not because they're bored, because they just had a holy, mackerel moment.
I love it. Boom.
Right? And the energy, they start hyperventilating. Yeah. That's your body. That's your soul trying to get you to move towards it. Right? So we need to stop looking at entrepreneurs as this rare, unique thing. And we need to recognize the extent to which our systems of education and our organizational structures systematically inhibit the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills.
Gary, You are a gift to the world. Keep doing what you're
Mm.
doing. We're running out of time here. Will you come back on?
Sean, I'm happy to help.
This is
I'm
great.
stuck at home. This is the longest I've gone without being on a plane for like a decade.
You and me both. I'm like, what?
I know.
I do not miss airports at all.
Yeah. I just miss I miss interacting with people around these ideas. I'm working on a new book. I'm kind of hunkered down in the basement, thinking and writing, but I'm happy to do it. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Gary. We are grateful for you and taking time out. And let's maybe what we do is we talk a little bit more about how next time we have a little more structure to this and give a lesson and tie it to some visual tool we can give away to people.
Yep. Happy to do it, Sean.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Have a wonderful
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.